Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to teach you how to make a panorama in Lightroom. Let's go. Alright, so I'm talking about making a panorama. Now, I'm not talking about the weird panorama that you make on your phone that looks all distorted and weird. No, we're talking about taking several images that you've captured with your camera on purpose and stitching them together to make one high resolution image. Now, the prerequisite of this is that you shoot with the final image and the process in mind. This isn't a fix or a recovery process. This is something that you do to create a really high resolution image right from the outset. That said, this process really isn't difficult, so let's jump in. When you're out and about, you'll need to shoot more than one image of your subject. Let's use a landscape in this example. Now, there's no hard and fast rule as to what is right, but consider this. The more images you split your subject into, or your photo or your composition into, the more resolution you will get. Now, hear my reasoning, and I'm just going to refer to maths for this, but say you split one image into 4. On my Canon M50, one image is 6000 by 4000 pixels. If you take that one composition, which would have been 6000 by 4000, and actually combine it to be 4 of those images, you actually get a resolution of 96 megapixels, more or less. And I say more or less because what actually happens is you do lose a little bit of information around the edges because of the distortion and the warping, but you know that you're there or thereabouts. Now, I know if you're posting on something like Instagram or Facebook, in fact most social medias nowadays compress your image to absolute hell, you're not going to really need this resolution, and I might catch you guys saying like, oh, why would you do that? This just seems like more effort, and to an extent you'd be right. But if you're wanting to print an image extremely high res, and you have, say, the new Sony a7S III, which is only a 10 megapixel camera, 12.1 megapixel camera, then taking those extra photos is going to give you more megapixels and allow you to blow that image up larger. Now, I know there is a limit and every use case differs. I know people that have blown images up that were taken on 15 megapixel cameras to like the size of billboards, etc. So it can be done, but this is more of the kind of perfectionist, completionist type thing, that if you want to have a really big image, get as much detail as you possibly can. So you've got multiple images of your subject. Open them up in Lightroom, select them all, right click them, and then click Photo Merge. Under this, you'll want to select, obviously, Panorama. Now, this will take a second to process, but when it has processed, you'll be presented with a preview of what your panorama looks like, as well as some settings that you can change. Obviously, this process will take longer if you have more images, if more resolution, it just takes longer to process. More difficult for the image to be stitched together if there's lots of intricate lines, etc. This will obviously take longer for the engine inside Photoshop and Lightroom to actually figure out what is what. Alright, now we have our panorama, we can change a few options. First up, you'll see projection. This will change the way that the panorama is stitched and warped. Spherical is my default and my go-to. Cylindrical is practically the same thing, except there's less warping on like your y-axis. Perspective warps based on, well, perspective, obviously. It figures out based on, you know, the angles and everything, kind of which way you are facing, and it will create one of those Google Earth, Google Street View type images where you've got one image kind of over here, one image here, and then one image like here. You've got the boundary warp setting, which is a slider from 0 to 100. 0 is no warping, but will result in more white area, and 100 is more warping, but will result in a higher warped image, but you will find that you have no white space at the edge of your frame. Fill edges parameter lets you select whether or not you want to use the content aware fill to fill in those corners that might be missing due to all of the warping. You can kind of do what you want here. I personally chop and change just as much, so I don't really have any recommendation on what to do. If it's a very complicated image, you're probably best off leaving it off and just cropping, because you'll find that the AI can't really figure out exactly what is best. Auto settings is kind of like auto exposure, so it will adjust the tone and the exposure to re-expose your image based on kind of the auto exposure algorithm, essentially. I generally leave this checked because I find it's quite handy just to get me to a nice starting point. Although if you've taken all of your images at the same kind of exposure settings, then you can probably turn it off and you'll be able to process it just as normal. Final parameter is create stack. I always leave this checked purely because it allows you to expand those images afterwards. Not really sure why you need it, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so with all those settings now dialed in, we can click merge. We can now finally take this image from being a stitched panorama into an actual photo inside our Lightroom library, and we can process it just as we would any other photo. This doesn't have to stay in Lightroom either. You can use the dynamic links between Photoshop and Lightroom to take this into Photoshop and apply any extra processing that you might need. That pretty much sums up creating a panorama in Lightroom. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please leave a like. It does help the channel. I'm working on more tutorials just like this one, so get subscribed and like the bell to stay up to date whenever I release those videos. But that's it for this video, and until the next one, see ya.